Hey class, so in this lecture we're going to be talking about the domains of life. So this whole chapter is about an introduction into how do we group, classify, name organisms, and then the kinds of things we look at for evolutionary relationships and how we see that depicted in diagrams. Right, so first lecture, domains of life. There are three domains of life. Okay, so I'm going to tell you those with some examples. So the first domain is called the domain bacteria. Okay, so domain bacteria is going to have what we consider just kind of the normal bacteria. So like if I were to just see you and ask you, like real quick, tell me an example of a kind of bacteria. The kinds of things most people are going to think of, things like E. coli, that kind of deal. Maybe you know streptococcus from having strep throat, or staphylococcus from having a staph infection on your skin or something like that. So those are all just kind of the normal bacteria. You know, the ones that most people are familiar with are ones that cause harm to us and other organisms, but you know, lots of things in the domain bacteria are not disease causing. Right, so all the normal bacteria go there, and then this group I'm going to tell you about, it's kind of redundant because they really belong in the normal bacteria, but they're really important. It's a group called cyanobacteria. And these were the first organisms to use photosynthesis. So these are really important evolutionarily because of that. You know, when we look at more complex kinds of organisms, most of those things require oxygen, and oxygen accumulation in the atmosphere began with these first photosynthetic cyanobacteria. All right, so those are the kinds of things in the domain bacteria. The second domain is called the domain archaea. So archaea include these organisms that are called archaebacteria. So these are also bacteria, but they're not the normal kind of bacteria you think about. So these are going to include bacteria that are in groups that are based on the kinds of environments they like. And while there's a lot of archaebacteria that are just kind of normal, like in the soil or in the ocean or something like that, we typically, especially in a class like this, will discuss these with the idea of this, they live in weird places. So there are some groups of these, for example, acidophiles. So phile is from philia, which means to love. So these acidophiles are archaebacteria that live where we have really low pH. The opposite of that would be alkalophiles. They would live in a location, an environment with a high pH. Halophiles. So halo refers to salt content. So halophiles would be things that are living where we have high salt content. Sorry, I'm going to move this picture. I didn't give myself enough room to do this. And I think that should work. So halophiles, high salt, and then one more example, thermophiles. So those would live where there's really high temperatures. Right, so all those are kind of like weird, not your everyday sort of environments that we would find a lot of these archaebacteria in. So if you're thinking of the regular everyday bacteria, again, like if somebody said, what's an example of bacteria, and you said E. coli or strep or staph or salmonella or all those things, none of those would be in the domain archaea. All right, so those two, let me actually show you this real quick before we move on. So these first two domains, bacteria and archaea, these are all of the organisms that we classify as prokaryotes. It's been a while, but if you remember when we talked about cells, there are two kinds of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And these prokaryotic cells make up prokaryotes. And these two domains include all of the prokaryotes. All right, and then the last domain is called eukarya. So this is going to include all of the eukaryotes that are made of eukaryotic cells. And these are the kinds of eukaryotes. There are protists. So the common protists are things like algae, amoeba. You may have looked at amoeba like in high school biology or something like that. Paramecium, same thing. You may have seen that in high school bio. So, these are abundant, 70 or 80,000 different kinds of protists, but they're not sort of your average everyday organism that you would encounter and know about and talk about. So there are protists, there's plants, fungi, animals. Right, so the protists are again kind of the one thing in this list of four that not everybody really can just automatically go, oh yeah, I know what protists are. Plants, fungi, and animals, we know what those things are. All right, so those four things in this domain eukarya, those are all of the eukaryotes. All right, so our prokaryotes are divided into two domains, and then all of the eukaryotes are put into one domain. All right, so all those are domains of life. And here's a tree that shows us these domains of life. So here's, of course, bacteria, here's archaea, here's eukarya. Okay, and where those are branching off of this tree. Right, so notice with this tree, this diagram, we have this kind of branch point down here that all of this stuff has in common. Right, so this would literally be showing us the common ancestor of everything. Right, whatever that dot there represents would be the common ancestor of everything. So all the life we have on our planet, which is represented by this picture, all evolved from some common ancestor way back when. Right, so that dot on this picture would be that common ancestor. And then I want to show you something that's kind of interesting with this. So back up on top, we mentioned that the bacteria and the archaea were our prokaryotes. So it kind of makes sense if we thought that the domain bacteria and the domain archaea should be really close on this tree. And then all these eukaryotes should be away from those other things, the bacteria. But if you look at the position of the archaea, which is the red color, the position of the archaea on this tree of life is actually closer to the eukaryotes, right? So they actually have this ancestor here in common, which the regular bacteria that are in purple don't have. So there are actually some characteristics of members of the archaea, the archaebacteria. There are characteristics of those that they have in common with things like plants and animals and fungi and protists. Okay, so it's interesting to see that placement because we would maybe kind of expect to see the red on this tree branching off over here somewhere because those are all prokaryotes, but that's not what we see. All right, so those are our three domains of life and some examples of what we find in those domains.